Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast with your host, Philip Eidson. Here, thought leaders share the trends, strategies, and tactics that you can use to elevate the role of procurement and your career.
Hi there, everybody, and welcome to this week's Art of Procurement podcast. Today, I welcome onto the show Ted Olshefski. Ted is responsible for direct procurement at Panasonic North America. And I've come to know Ted well over the past 18 months or so I was really delighted to finally be able to welcome him onto the show. And in fact, both Ted and I will be speakers at the upcoming ProcureCon Direct 2018 conference. It's going to be in San Diego, California, and taking place on August the 21st and 22nd. So if you're interested, you want to find out a little bit more about ProcureCon Direct, you can head over to procurecondirect.wbresearch.com, or frankly, just search ProcureCon Direct in any search engine, and you'll be directed to their homepage. I had the opportunity to sit down with Ted in preparation for the event on the topic of single-source suppliers, and our discussion turned into really an introduction to some of the considerations at play when developing risk mitigation strategies for scenarios where you have a single source. Now, you may have a single source because that supplier enjoys a monopolistic position, or perhaps just because of your own business decisions. And so, as we started the conversation, I began by asking Ted my traditional first question, which is, did Ted find procurement, or did procurement find him?
It's a great question, Phil. I mean, I stumbled into procurement, and that was, I don't think by accident. Just kind of give a quick backstory. Supply chain is in my blood. My father was in supply chain logistics for 40 plus years, and I kind of just subconsciously followed in his footsteps. So, I consider myself an end-to-end supply chain professional. Early in my career, I focused in transportation, logistics, and warehousing, and made an effort to gain the experience, boots on the ground in the operations, to truly understand the complexity of the entire supply chain. And as I kind of matured in my professional career, I went into supply chain project management, and then I did more business development, sales-focused activities on the other side of the table, selling supply chain and procurement solutions to Fortune 1000, Global 2000 companies, and then stumbled back into a daily practitioner role. So I've been doing it, the better half of 10 years, and I enjoy it. And I don't know how you feel about this, Phil. Procurement professionals don't just always start in procurement. There's a lot of folks that have the finance and the accounting background who stumble into procurement and get involved in that way. And then vice versa. You have supply chain professionals that are, either on the back end of the supply chain or, maybe in the middle with demand planning, and naturally progress into a procurement and sourcing type of functional role.
No, it's interesting. We come from so many varied backgrounds, and most that I asked that question to did stumble upon procurement in one way or another, and then came to enjoy and oftentimes love the profession. But it wasn't something that a lot of us set out, I don't think, for a career in it. And it's interesting then, as we think about the next generation, like, how do we attract the next generation of talent? If we all fell into it, how do we make it appealing enough that people want to come and join procurement?
Yeah, and I think just to piggyback on that last point you made, Phil, is how do we engage the next generation? And I think our universities and our academia world is doing a good job. I mean, there's excellent supply chain undergrad programs that are out there that are really starting to focus on procurement as individual courses, both at the undergraduate and graduate degree. And we're seeing a push. I mean, I've seen a push with working with interns, not only in my current role, but in previous roles where there is a desire and they see potential opportunity for themselves, because you're touching multiple areas within procurement, right?
Yeah.
You're working with third parties, suppliers, you're developing negotiation skills, you get heavy exposure to contract management, working with your legal representatives within your companies, exposed to risk management. So your exposure is is across the board, right? When you're in procurement,
yeah,
depending on the role,
you get to see a lot of the business.
There's opportunity.
As you have grown in your career within the procurement supply chain space, are there some kind of guiding principles that you take to any role? It's your way of being, if you will, that you go from one position to another position that really informs how you work, both internally and with your suppliers.
Yeah, I mean, my approach has always been, understanding the business that I'm supporting and, having that thorough background. What am I going to go out and buy, or what services do we want to procure for our business? Before I even do that, it's taking a step back and working with those business stakeholders and understand their day-to-day business. Mm-hmm. I want to be able to understand their business so I can take whatever requirements they may be, basic requirements or technical requirements that involve maybe engineering and product design, et cetera, and evaluate the potential to either go out to market and test the market for potential suppliers and pricing, and get a competitive bid process going. Mm-hmm. But having that backbone and that core understanding of what you're asking your suppliers, I always took the time and to focus on that to make sure I'm delivering to my stakeholders.
Yeah, I know when we've talked off mic a number of times, you really arrow in on the idea of being a business partner.
Yeah, no, and that's a good point you make. It's an approach that I believe in, where dedicating yourself as a procurement professional to the business that you're supporting. And I think both of you and I know, and whomever might be listening to this podcast, most organizations have had some sort of negative experience with someone in procurement, and that's unfortunate, but it's about changing perception and people's understanding that, let us take this weight off your day-to-day business. Let us build your requirements, gain your trust, get the best possible pricing, the best terms and conditions, and make sure we deliver on your requests. But at the same time, keeping them, abreast of every major milestone throughout that sourcing project, involving them, and just like the term business partner sounds, that's exactly what you're doing. You're partnering with them, and you're bringing them along for the ride. And I found that to be, successful in my career, and that's where that trust is really gained between you and your business stakeholders.
Well, for some context, just to kind of tee up the remainder of our conversation. So you're currently responsible for direct procurement within Panasonic North America. And I think most listeners know Panasonic from direct to consumer products, audio systems, TVs, DVD players. When we first talked, which was probably over a year or so ago, I was really surprised about the scope of Panasonic's business. It goes a lot broader than that. I wonder if you could just share so that listeners can kind of understand the scope of your responsibilities and the products that you're responsible for buying. What some of those categories are that they may be surprised to hear that Panasonic's a major player in.
Absolutely. So, just like you said, Phil, I learned just as much as you, coming into Panasonic. And yeah, of course, you think of TVs in North America and other electronic products at the consumer level that you mentioned. But in North America, that's not the scope of our business. Outside of North America, absolutely. We are very heavily involved in energy, mobility, and connectivity solutions for our business-to-business customers and our business-to-government customers. So, how I translate into that is, Panasonic, what I've observed has done a good job leveraging their technology expertise for their clients. Something to note for listeners, Panasonic is the number one global provider of electric vehicle batteries. In addition to, Panasonic is a global leader in smart city infrastructure and technology solutions. So, those main key areas are solar, energy storage, smart lighting, security, POS, et cetera. What I'm most proud of and to be a part of is how, a global company and a brand recognized company like Panasonic, Panasonic North America has really been able to adapt its business by leveraging their core consumer technologies and adapting them to a broad applications, to empower those business and government clients and transform their operations and more effectively meet the needs of their customers.
Today, I want to talk a little bit about, I think it's a common challenge. It's a common challenge for all of us in procurement, frankly, but I think it's more, it has a bigger impact on strategy and on tactics in the direct procurement space. And that's the topic of sole sourcing. Now, before we go kind of into a line of questions that I have in that topic, I just wonder if, just to set the context again, is if we could define sole sourcing. So what do you mean when you talk about sole sourcing?
Yeah, so I mean, when you look to define what sole sourcing means is that's a sole source supplier is the only supplier who's available to provide, a product or a service. Mm-hmm. There are no other suppliers. And oftentimes, when you're supporting your business stakeholders, there's sometimes confusion with what I'm sure you're familiar with, Phil, is a single source supplier.
Yeah.
Where, single source suppliers, one who's buying organization requires the use of, despite the fact that there's more than one supplier in the market mm-hmm. and available.
So let's just assume there's a supplier that's they're in a monopolistic position, so there truly is no alternative but to use them, and that can sometimes make you pretty vulnerable. I just wonder if you could share some tips or examples of really how you've been successful in kind of bringing parity to that relationship, so it isn't all one way and that the supplier has all the power in the relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, if you want to break it down even more, it's, what is the third party supplier doing on your behalf for your mm-hmm. company? If they're manufacturing a product, they are the sole supplier that does this in either your market location or even globally. And, even from a design perspective, if your business is the one with your engineering team and your product teams that, did all the product specifications, the technical requirements, CAD drawings, whatever have you, I think if the playing ground gets a little bit level, if the business has the IP on their product specifications and requirements, right? But they're going to that third-party supplier to say, hey, XYZ company, we need you to manufacture this on our behalf. Let's, my guidance and, experience that's happened a few times in my career is bringing them to the table and really partnering with them. And they're not your supplier anymore. Now they're a very strategic partner. Because that supplier, wants the revenue opportunity and realize that. And at the same time, you as the business, need to work with this supplier in order to, satisfy your business requirements, your revenues, your forecasts, et cetera, to get this product out to the market. So, again, it kind of goes back to, having that strategic relationship, that partnership in place with the sole supplier, and letting them have a seat at the table. I mean, that opens up doors to innovating collaboratively, cross engineering teams, cross product teams, and the opportunity to have a nice synergy together between both companies for equal share, so equal revenue and product lead times and manufacturing demands as well.
So in situations like that, trust can often be an issue. I've been there where I've been with suppliers who have had a sole source situation, whether it's through monopoly or whether it's through design. And I was always really wary, and perhaps that was just the stage of my career and what I was taught, in the organization that I was in, but always really wary to share information. And I always had a relationship where I didn't necessarily trust the other side. And I think that inhibits that creates an that creates a relationship where there isn't trust and where it is combative and where you are putting yourself at a little bit at their whim because ultimately you're as if not more dependent on them than they are on you. So I wonder, when you think about sharing information and transparency, what should we be? How open should we be with a supplier, in your opinion, when we have a single source relationship with them?
Well, that's a great point, Phil. I mean, my answer to that question would be, contractually bound at that point when you're having those level of discussions. Mm-hmm. Yes, a mutual NDA is a nice starting point, but once a supplier is actually manufacturing actual prototypes or demo products on your behalf, and the timeline is leading up to live manufacturing, then you should be under a contract, and your exclusivity rights, indemnification, all your contractual terms and conditions protecting both parties should govern your relationship. Mm-hmm. And the one side piece to this is, you mentioned, in your question about, the third party supplier, they're at risk if, our business or any business that you're supporting, your company you're working for is 100% of their revenues. I mean, there's risk on both sides at that point. So, if that's the case, then, you have to kind of guide that business relationship and that partnership a little bit more with a fine-tooth comb. But again, it's when you're in that environment, it's a partnership, and there are accountabilities and SLAs that you expect from your supplier, and you can work through those if you have the right folks involved and the communication is clear. Communication's the number one important thing, mm-hmm. Between both parties. I often over communicate. So if you're not communicating enough, then some parties may be missing important tasks and deliverables, and that could have significant delays and impacts to your business.
So I want to move away from sole sourcing, and I want to go to how we're in a situation where we have a sole source, but it's something that has been it's perhaps based on our own business decisions. How can we start thinking about developing alternative sources of supply, really to mitigate risk? Where do you start?
I think it's all about gaining your business stakeholders that you're supporting, product groups, et cetera, getting their buy-in, right? Mm-hmm. Their roadmaps, their product timelines. Making sure you're engaged in their planning, whether it's fiscal or quarterly planning, to understand their upcoming product releases, et cetera. To find an alternative, there's in the 21st century we're graced with various companies having ecosystems and knowledge to supplier intel, where you can instead of just opening up your Safari browser and going to Google, you can actually use a tool to hit the global market space to understand who has these capabilities. Mm-hmm. And I see that being used a lot now. Just colleagues that are in procurement with other organizations, and in the last 5 years, that I've been obviously I've seen it in the last 5 years, and it's growing. So I mean, you have other sources, and it takes time, especially if it's niche. Yeah. So there's opportunities there for procurement professionals to seek alternative information around kind of niche key players.
Yeah, I always found it was so important to have that relationship with your engineer, at least in the direct procurement world that I lived in, which was in automotive. You have that relationship with your engineer who's actually open to new ideas, then that's so critical. If you don't have that, I always felt like I was banging my head against a brick wall. So building that relationship with your engineer was so important, because then they're going to be a key player in helping to develop a second source or a third source or whatever it may be, because most of the time it's not like a product from an alternative supplier is available off the table. You're doing a lot of development, I think, of their capabilities to bring them up to a level where they have the potential to then supply you as an alternative.
Sure. Yeah, and I think, strategies where you can implement, that dual sourcing strategy on either one product or multiple products. You minimize your internal risk as a business that's actually sourcing those products, right? So you create an equal playing field, but you also are now creating competition amongst your preferred suppliers if you're in a dual, sourcing framework on that particular product category, which is could be beneficial, right? So, procurement procurement professionals, you want to minimize risk as much as possible and wherever as possible. Ensure compliance as well. So, there's compliance levels that you have to abide by around certain materials that are in the products. So having that, kind of approach too is another alternative, if it presents itself, if you're in a sole source kind of situation.
How important is it for us, and I'm thinking of us as a broader organization of which procurement is a part of, to actually take a leadership role in developing suppliers who we don't work with today, so that they may have the potential to supply us tomorrow, as opposed to just expecting that we're going to walk up to another supplier and they're going to be a perfect fit for us, and adding them to our supplier list as being a dual source. I just wonder what your experience is on developing suppliers versus just going to suppliers that are already ready with some off-the-shelf technology that fits straight in to your product.
Yeah, so I think, you made the point earlier about, having a, good working relationship with your engineering groups, your product groups, working with them on their roadmap strategies to, get requirements, to start potentially evaluating other, sources of suppliers that manufacture the same product or widget or whatever have you, and getting that process started early. It's easier said than done in most businesses, because it's a lot of legwork that you got to do off to the side to your normal day-to-day job, where you could start engaging, doing mini RFIs to companies once you have identified some potential supplier candidates and understanding their capabilities, and you could go to market and do an RFP once you have all of your information and your requirements that you need, or start having conversations to get prototypes working and having your engineering teams test it through all their testing criteria, going through quality assurance, etc. So I mean, it's all about planning up front, right? And it goes back to your point, which I agree with, is working with those other stakeholders within the product and engineering groups.
Yeah, and it's a long process, isn't it? Like you mentioned at the beginning, it's not something you expect to bear fruit immediately. It may actually take years. I've had experiences where it's taken me 2 or 3 years to actually fully develop an alternative source of supply, but the investment in doing that is worth it. For one, the risk mitigation, but also two, for bringing in new competition into a marketplace.
Sure. And it's all the complexity of what you're looking to bring back in through an alternative supplier, right? So if it's your standard off-the-shelf widget, it's not going to take 2 years.
No.
If it's kind of a niche product that's going into a product, it takes time.
Yeah, and that was definitely my experiences were in those niche products, where it's stuff that you've engineered, or oftentimes you've partnered with suppliers to engineer them for your solution. And then you're thinking, okay, how can I then mitigate my risk over time? And are there other ways to approach the problem? Because, in a few years' time, there may be other providers out there with different technologies, and you want to start building relationships with them now, even if you're not in a position to actually integrate the product into your end item today. You don't want to just have all your eggs in 1 or 2 baskets.
Right. Absolutely.
So as you develop that new source of supply, what do you do? What do you do with it, basically? And it's a little bit of a loaded question. I think in terms of you've now created a competitive marketplace. Perhaps you've invested in the development of a supplier. You've got competition. how do you use that competition to make sure that you have the best outcome, both for your existing incumbent and also for the suppliers that you've been developing?
Yeah, so I think it goes, to your, working with your supply chain organization, understanding the demand in your forecast, and taking a, strategic approach with that new identified supplier, to start giving them POs to start manufacturing products. And, through my experience, I've seen kind of the gradual introduction to that new supplier, either giving them, a handful of SKUs or 20 SKUs at a time of those, to start working on and start testing them early on and slowly ramp them up, at, an equal competitive level with the incumbent or existing supplier.
Yeah, so not just switching it all at one time.
Oh, yeah.
It's a recipe for disaster.
Right.
Okay, well, Ted, I really appreciate you spending some time with us today. I just, as we come to wrap up, it's the easy question. I just wondered if you could share, if listeners would like to get in touch, connect with you, where can they find you?
Sure. I'm on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Ted Olshefski. And we'll be presenting in about a week and a half at ProcureCon Direct outside of San Diego, August 21st through the 22nd.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Well, I'll include a link to ProcureCon, also to your LinkedIn profile, and the show notes for today. I'll be there at ProcureCon Direct as well, so I look forward to catching up with you face-to-face again. Those are going to be at artofprocurement.com/Panasonic. That's artofprocurement.com/Panasonic. So, Ted, one more time, thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil. Appreciate it.
Cheers. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Art of Procurement. To find an archive of all past episodes, you can go to artofprocurement.com/episodes. And to ensure you never miss another show, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe.